Donkey Kong Bananza's main mechanic is punching, as it lets you efficiently dig around the breakable levels and helps you defeat enemies with ease. But can you still beat the entire game without punching a single time? Well, the answer is quite complicated. Rules. I am not allowed to press the Y button to punch, the X button to punch upwards, or the B button to punch downwards. I can still jump, roll, grab, throw, double jump, surf turf, and use Bananza transformations. Glitches are allowed, but I'll only use them when necessary, and won't use any glitches that involve punching. There are multiple sections throughout the game where punching is required to progress, so we could be stopped dead in our tracks at any point along the way, not to mention the multiple bosses and levels that become ridiculously harder when you can't punch. So, is it possible to beat Donkey Kong Bananza without punching? Let's find out. So we start a new game and 20 seconds in, this appears. Now, I choose to look at this as an interactive cutscene and not actual gameplay. So we press Y 5 times before Donkey Kong breaks through the wall and a cutscene plays. I finally take control over Donkey Kong and begin to bash his head against some rocks, which will basically be our method for breaking stuff for the rest of the run. We get through the game's opening tutorial with relative ease, with only a few hurdles such as this area where you need to dig down, so instead we use some explodey gold, and these two dive punch sections, which we just roll into the walls to skip. At the end, we roll into these bananas, skip the cutscene, and again, the game once again forces us to punch. But for the same reason as last time, this doesn't really count as it's basically just a cutscene. So we punch upwards 3 times and move on. Honestly, one of the most annoying parts of this challenge was spamming the roll button to break through stuff, as it's extremely ineffective, and the urge to punch was just frustrating to say the least. Anyways, nothing really happens until we start chasing Odd Rock. At the end of the chase, a bunch of enemies are spawned, and it's a good showcase of how good rolling is in combat. This will basically just be our replacement for punching when it comes to enemies and bosses, as well as just digging around. Then we climb up this wall and break the dirt above us simply by jumping. Anyways, nothing all that interesting happens on this layer, so we defeat the mini-boss type thing by rolling into them, and then progress to the next level. Next up is the Lagoon layer, and just to avoid this video getting boring, I'm going to skip anything that isn't an obstacle or a boss fight, just so I'm not describing exactly everything I'm doing. After we get the Kong Bananza, we're met with a wall that blocks the way forward. Here, you're supposed to transform into the Kong Bananza and then punch your way through the wall and through all the subsequent walls behind it. But we obviously can't do that. Instead, we go behind the Elder Kong, wall climb on this pipe, we then spam photo mode, and eventually, we clip through the bars and get to the other side, skipping the wall entirely. After this, we're met with the Pika Bruiser boss fight. At first, I thought this fight would be impossible, as the boss is made up of a material only the Kong Bananza can break. But randomly, it changes from concrete to sand, which I could then easily break through by rolling. So the fight was me just waiting for them to turn into sand, and then just rolling into them. Towards the end of the fight, their shell is destroyed, and we can easily just roll into them a bunch, and eventually we defeat them. Hilltop is the next layer, and literally nothing noteworthy happens. So I'll just take this time to say that throughout this run, I'm collecting Banandium gems, so that I can upgrade my health and potentially other skills that may help me along the way. After that is the Canyon layer. This layer is also pretty casual up until the first boss, Grumpy Kong, who gave me quite a lot of trouble. Usually the boss is unbelievably easy with the Kong Bananza, but without punching, it's a nightmare. At first I destroyed the bottom layer of the boss as it's made out of mud, but then the other 2 layers are virtually unbreakable. I walked around hopelessly trying to find something to break these layers to no avail, but then I discovered you can just jump up and roll into him, which is easier said than done, by the way, as he continuously shakes you off. So this fight consisted of me climbing up, rolling into him, getting thrown off, and repeat. But after doing it enough times, I eventually defeated him. Most of this next part is just a minecart section, so I'll skip over it and the boss, as it was done pretty much the same way you would do it casually. A little bit later though, we faced the next obstacle, which was this wall of rotating mud with concrete at the top. I eventually came up with a plan with holding some explodey gold, jumping to break through the mud, and then throwing the gold at the concrete before climbing up to the top of the tower. Shortly after though, you're met with Stomp and Clomper, who gave me quite a bit of trouble as well. The first phase is easy enough, as you can knock them down by rolling into both of their feet, and then just roll and spam jump to break through the shell, and roll into them once they're out. However, for the second phase, Stomp and Clomper goes from a weak mud exterior to a concrete one, which is much harder to break. I ended up having to grab debris from the floor, jump under them to damage the concrete, and once he fell down, I once again just chucked debris into the concrete until the shell eventually broke. After that, a bunch of rolls was all it took to defeat them. Next up is the Divide, and It's the divide, so nothing happens. We just go straight towards the freezer side and jump down. Once we're in the freezer layer, your first hurdle is this dive punch button, but luckily you can just headbutt the ice to break it instead. After that, we collect all 3 ancient record pieces, which was a little bit tedious, and then get the zebra Bananza. Next up was the Poppy Kong boss fight, which was honestly pretty easy. Rolling into her isn't enough to stun her, so instead I threw blocks of ice at her and then proceeded to roll into her like there was no tomorrow. After doing this a couple times, she was defeated. Right after this, there's a puzzle involving these small ice cubes, and it was relatively annoying as we had to carve a path for them to melt some molten chocolate. But after literally smacking my head against the wall, I was able to get past. After that, we're met with Inflaminite. This is yet another boss that is unbelievably easy with the Kong Bananza by punching, but without it, it's extremely difficult. Basically, once the boss stuns themselves, there's only a short amount of time before they get back up, and in that time I had to break their shell, which was very tight and tricky to pull off. It basically just ended up coming down to luck, and I kept rolling and jumping inside of their head and hoping that one of these attempts would break the shell and then I could just roll into them. And after doing this 3 separate times, we finally defeat them. Next, we backtrack to the divide again, but instead go towards the forest layer. Whilst making our way to the hotel, there's a little section where you're supposed to dig into the tree branch to pass these thorny vines. So instead, I did some fancy spin jumping to get over them instead. I then just gathered the ancient records, got the ostrich Bananza, and broke all of these poison things. The next obstacle was another downward punch button, which was made to break these thorny vines blocking our path. Instead, I just painstakingly threw a bunch of stuff at the vines until there was a tiny gap for me to squeeze through. Inside, we are met with Abracadabra. What are these names? This boss fight was honestly quite easy, as you just fly towards them using the ostrich Bananza and then roll into them a bunch. With both the freezer layer and the forest layer completed, we can now progress through the junction layer and fight Void Kong. For this fight, you chase him around multiple previous levels, and honestly, it's pretty simple. Just dodge some of his attacks and then just roll into him. It was probably easier to hit him by rolling than punching most times too, until we return to the junction and fight him there. This section was actually pretty tricky, as you need to break these purple things whilst getting through the barriers, and also dodging his aerial assault, which is obviously much easier when you can just punch the walls and the purple things. Anyways, after spam rolling through the mud, we temporarily beat Void Kong by rolling into him a bunch. Next, we move on to the restore layer, which has a giant melon blocking the way forward. Usually, you just downward punch into this button and the melon cracks in half, but we obviously can't do that. So instead, I just grab some melon skin and double jump to continuously break the melon below me. Once at the bottom, I was able to blow up the melon and jump down to the next level. In the Tempest layer, we immediately jump down to defeat the boss Blusterwing, as you need to beat them to retrieve the ancient records and progress. To knock them down, we just throw some sand at their wings. Once they're on the ground, you're supposed to downward punch into them. So I instead just grab some sand and double jump on top of them, which throws the sand below and damages them. I had to do this quite a lot, as this method does barely any damage. Thankfully, after only half of their health bar, Blusterwing flies away, leaving behind an updraft. And unfortunately, there's no way to get past this without a dive punch. Look, I literally tried everything, but nothing I came up with worked. I even went into another save file and destroyed everything surrounding the hole, and nothing. Maybe in the future there's some sort of glitch to get down, or maybe even a Tempest Layer skip entirely. But for now, we dive punch down. So the answer is no. You can't beat Donkey Kong Bananza without punching. But now our goal will shift to how many punches are required to beat it instead. With tears in our eyes, we collect both ancient record pieces, get the Elephant Bananza, and drop down this hole to fight Blusterwing once again. With the new Elephant Bananza, this fight is actually much easier than last time, as I can now just throw a bunch of rocks into them until they fly away once again. And leave another updraft. We dive punch down and do the next section the intended way. And at the end, there's another updraft. We dive punch down again and fight Blusterwing for the final time. It's pretty much the same thing, with us just now sucking up the rocks from outside the arena and throwing it at them. And with that throw, we defeated the... Wait, no. So to get the final blow on Blusterwing, we have to dive punch. I actually hate this stupid bird. Everyone comment down below, I hate Blusterwing for 5 years of good luck. Next up is the Landfill layer, which probably would have given us more trouble if it wasn't for the Elephant Bananza, as we can just make a spiral staircase down in the mud, rather than punching all the way down. Once at the bottom, we rematch against Pika Bruiser, and the Elephant Bananza also makes this much easier too. After their shell is broken, we just roll into them a bunch and eventually defeat them. The racing layer is actually really easy, as you can just suck up some floating empty material, float over to the racetrack, and then float up to the victory cup to progress to the next layer. It's actually kind of funny that you don't need to even do the race to leave the place. Next up is the Radiance layer. Nothing all that interesting happens here. We just get the Snake Bananza, fight Poppy Kong again and defeat them the exact same way as we did last time, and then fight Grumpy Kong again, which is actually a little bit easier with the Elephant Bananza. All of the in-between gameplay of this was just a lot of rolling around and was very similar to what you've already seen from this challenge, so I just didn't want to bore you with all the details. Anyways, after the Grumpy Kong fight, we end up in the Groove layer. This part was so unbelievably frustrating and tedious, it's not even funny. Basically, you have to go into these 3 different sections, and each of them end with you breaking through a massive blockage of dirt, and it took so long to roll through all of them to get to the other side. Anyways, after we finally break through the last one, we then go on to save Pauline and oh no. So yeah, there's literally no other way to save Pauline here, so we have to bite the bullet and punch downwards to save her. After Pauline is saved, we end up in the Feast layer, and we're immediately met with some more bad news. To complete this level, you need to press 5 burger switches, and the only way to do it is to dive punch. I tried everything to avoid this, like dropping egg bombs on the switches, or only switching one and then digging through the burger, but unfortunately, we have to punch another 5 times in the Feast layer to progress. Anyways, we put it behind us, jump down the burger, and then fight Muckety Muck, which was pretty easy as we can just throw sand to dissolve them and then roll into them until they go down. Next up is the Forbidden layer. I didn't have enough money to pay the Securitone, so I did some cool snake/ostrich shenanigans to get across the gap. Here, there are multiple concrete walls that you need to break with the Kong Bananza, but as I'm a genius, I instead kept grabbing gold off the walls and throwing it at the concrete. After this, we rematch with Void Kong, and this fight was actually really fun without punching. The first phase is simple enough, as we just parkour over to him and roll, but the second phase was much trickier. It's essentially the same as the original fight in the Junction layer, but way harder. The walls are now taller, there's lava everywhere, plus his aerial attacks are bigger. To get past this, I just decided to parkour over the wall using Surf Turf Tech, and then rolling into the purple things. This was actually a lot of fun to do, and I'll probably use this method when fighting him in future playthroughs too. Anyways, we roll into him a bunch and defeat him. Now we chase King K. Rool towards the planet core. This layer is structured with a bunch of mini challenges connected to each other by minecarts, and this part in particular made me struggle. Basically, you're supposed to dive punch into these buttons, causing all the thorns to break, but we obviously couldn't do that. So instead, I transformed into the Elephant Bananza and sucked in the general direction of the dive punch buttons. The elephant's suck power only reaches a small distance in front of him, but luckily this method was just barely possible and we got through. Anyways, after getting past all of the challenges, we get to the final minecart, which is blocked by this. Literally the only way to move this out of the way so we can proceed is by turning into the Kong Bananza and charge punching. So we're stuck. Or are we? I jumped on top of the ball, Snake jumped up, switched to the ostrich, and glided towards the final arena. And just like that, we're in the final fight. Usually, the main way of damaging K. Rool is by charge punching these balls into him. But because we can't do that, defeating him is extremely tedious. The strategy is basically dodge the big balls, throw gold at the small balls to hit him, and then dodge these weird rock hands. Any downtime in between this, where K. Rool was just standing still, I would spam roll into him, but it did barely any damage. So this fight ended up just being a battle of endurance. After many minutes of dodging, throwing, and rolling, the already difficult fight made more difficult by this challenge was complete. Wait. Okay, this is stupid, I'm sorry. So we defeated King K. Rool a second time on the way up to New Donk City, and then we face our final real hurdle just before the actual final fight. Another ball is blocking our progress, and for a moment I really thought we'd have to use the Kong Bananza to charge punch it. But it turns out with some more snake and ostrich shenanigans, we can just glide to this wall and then climb up to here. All that's left to do now is to fight the King of Rot himself. This fight was essentially the same as the last, but just exponentially harder. The first part is relatively the same, with us hitting the small balls back and dodging the rot hands. I also started sucking up the rot on the ground and throwing it back to him for some extra damage. This also blocks his suck move too, so it's quite effective. In his second phase, he unlocks a new move, which genuinely made this fight so much longer as there's no chance to hit him for like 30 seconds. This fight literally took me 18 minutes of constant focusing, as just a little mistake could cost me the entire fight and I'd have to start again. I rolled and rolled and rolled into him, whittling off a sliver of his health each time, and eventually he was defeated. And there you have it, Donkey Kong Bananza beaten with only 10 punches. And interestingly enough, we never used a regular punch, only dive punches. Anyways, if you guys enjoyed this video, then please leave a like, subscribe, it really helps out. And I'll see you in the next one. Bye!